Complex life on our planet has existed for at least 3.5 billion years. But as a species, we only managed to create an industrial civilization around 300,000 years ago. That leaves 499, 700,000 pre-human years unaccounted for. And that time is more than enough time for the rise and fall of not one, but several pre-human industrial civilizations. But what if an earlier industrial civilization actually existed on Earth millions of years ago? If that were so, how would we be able to prove it? Or disprove it? This is the crux of the Silurian hypothesis, a fascinating idea of advanced prehistoric life. The Silurian hypothesis speculates that it's possible for civilizations to have gone completely extinct and that their relics have been buried for a long time. But could we find evidence that ancient aliens built an industrial civilization long before our own? Well, in fact, it's not as absurd as it sounds. We even don't need to go back millions of years to look for civilizations, or non-human civilizations at that. Our current understanding of human settlements stretches back little more than 10,000 years, yet humans have had the same relative brain capacity, the same intelligence, for about 500,000 years. It took less than 60 years for humans to go from horse-drawn carriages to a moon landing. Human civilizations could have risen to our current position dozens of times without leaving much of a trace. And a civilization that rose beyond our own or developed along different lines might leave behind artifacts we would hardly recognize. If 18th century humans found a compact disk, they would make nothing of it other than that it might be man-made. A satellite phone prior to round Earth theory would be completely inscrutable. Are we the first progression from hunter-gatherer to astronaut? It is mathematically possible. Legends are full of stories of godlike creatures with advanced technologies like flight and remote communication. Historians see this as evidence of the human imagination. Conspiracy theorists see this as evidence of extraterrestrials. Few posit it may be evidence of us. So how would we find ancient human civilizations? Well, let's roll the ball by digging deep into one of the most enduring architectural marvels in human history, the ancient Egyptian pyramids. These colossal structures have fascinated scholars, archaeologists, and enthusiasts for centuries, leaving us in awe of the engineering prowess and cultural significance they represent. However, despite extensive research, the exact age of the pyramids remains a topic of debate. Conventional Egyptology said that the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, attributed to Pharaoh Khufu, began around 2580 BCE and took approximately 20 years to complete. The other two pyramids on the Giza Plateau, built for pharaohs Khafre and Menkaure, followed in succession. This timeline is largely based on inscriptions, artifacts, and historical records found in and around the pyramids. One intriguing piece of evidence challenging the established timeline is the erosion patterns found on the Sphinx. While the mainstream view attributes the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre's era, some geologists and researchers argue that the erosional features on the monument are indicative of water erosion, possibly caused by heavy rainfall. The Sahara Desert, where the pyramids are located, experienced significantly wetter periods in ancient times, and some argue that this level of rainfall could have caused the observed water-related wear on the Sphinx. If this hypothesis holds true, it would suggest the Sphinx and, by extension, the pyramids are much older than previously assumed. Another aspect that raises questions about the pyramids' age is their precise astronomical alignments. For instance, the Great Pyramid exhibits a remarkable alignment with specific celestial bodies, including Orion's belt. The degree of accuracy required to achieve these alignments with the limited technology available in ancient Egypt is staggering. Alternative theories propose that the ancient Egyptians possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, far beyond what traditional views assume. Such a level of sophistication would challenge the accepted chronology and pushed the construction of the pyramids back into an even more ancient past. What's more, when carbon dating, a widely used technique to determine the age of organic materials applied to the pyramids, certain anomalies have been observed. In some cases, the results yielded dates significantly older than the established timeline. Skeptics argue that these discrepancies might be due to contamination or other factors, but proponents of an older pyramid age contend that it might indicate the presence of materials reused from earlier constructions. Evidence of advanced knowledge also can be found in the Pyramid of Giza, which was built thousands of years ago. The centers of the four sides are indented with an extraordinary degree of precision, forming the only 8-sided pyramid. This effect is not visible from the ground or from a distance, but only from the air, and then only under the proper lighting conditions. This phenomenon is only detectable from the air at dawn and sunset on the spring and autumn equinoxes, when the sun casts shadows on the pyramid. The cornerstone foundations of the pyramid have ball and socket construction capable of dealing with heat expansion and earthquakes. Those are some pretty big words for ancient man, thousands of years ago. While the construction of the Great Pyramid is a mystery and is something out of this world, its position is equally puzzling. According to measurements, the Great Pyramid is the most accurately aligned structure in existence and faces true north with only 3/60th of a degree of error. The position of the North Pole moves over time, and the pyramid was exactly aligned at one time. Even more incredibly, the Great Pyramid is located at the center of the landmass of the Earth. The east-west parallel that crosses the most land and the north-south meridian that crosses the most land intersect in two places on the Earth, one in the ocean and the other at the Great Pyramid. Even with modern-day tools and know-how, scientists have not determined a way to recreate the pyramids, even on smaller scales, with the same precisions as those who built the originals. That raises a question: if we can't recreate the Great Pyramid at Giza, then how did the Egyptians accomplish such a magnificent feat? Or were those giant structures built by an advanced civilization? Another sign of advanced prehistoric life is related to cities, of course. Not where they are now, but where they would have been during the last ice age. We know climate change and rising sea levels will consume 570 of our largest cities in the next 50 years. That is 1/7 of humanity impacted by only a 2-meter rise in sea level. But 20,000 years ago, the ocean was 120 meters lower. With water locked up in continental-sized glaciers, coastlines extended far out into what is now the deep ocean. Assuming humans then built their cities as humans do now, along the coast, primarily at major river tributaries, the vast majority of those ancient cities would only be found underwater. Amazingly, one such city has been discovered. In 2000, scientists using sonar off the west coast of India discovered the 9,500-year-old lost city of Dwarka. What had once been only the mythical home of Lord Krishna, the ruins of Dwarka remain below 40 meters of ocean, 20 kilometers off the coast of present-day India. Subsequent studies found that the city lay beside a riverbed, just as cities do today. While more maritime archaeology will be required to investigate Dwarka, this discovery proves the possibility of finding cities along whole continental shelves. Egyptians built their empires along the Nile, the only fertile floodplains in a sea of desert sands. But those sands weren't always desert. 11,000 years ago, the Sahara was lush and green with lakes, rivers, and forests. Somewhere out in the empty quarter, there may be the remains of fishing villages or trading cities, lost now in the vast, unexplored emptiness, glimpsed only in passing, unremarked by Bedouins. Whatever cities might have risen in that time would be lost to the sands. Or would they? In 1992, using satellite imagery, famed adventurer Ranulph Fiennes and his team discovered the fabled lost city of Ubar. Located in the remote expanse of the Rub al-Khali Desert of Oman, the city was discovered to have fallen into a sinkhole under its own weight and then buried by the desert. Once believed to be a legend, mentioned in the Quran and 1001 Arabian Nights, labeled the Atlantis of the Sands by T.E. Lawrence, its discovery begs the question: how many more such cities await the technology to find them? On the flip side, note that our seemingly indelible mark on this planet will someday be reduced to a thin layer of rock, composed of the eclectic materials with which we've constructed the human world. Collectively, they will make up our techno-signature, the unique imprint that accompanies every technological species. For example, the sediment from our current geological epoch, the Anthropocene, will likely contain abnormal amounts of nitrogen from fertilizer and rare earth elements from electronics. Even more telling, it may harbor veins of substances that don't occur naturally, like chlorofluorocarbons, plastics, and manufactured steroids. And of course, there's no reason every civilization must unfold in the same way. Perhaps a previous civilization went another route, favoring organic materials, biodegradable materials, over metallurgical. Either way, spider silk is stronger than steel. Titan is just as durable and feasibly manufactured as plastic. But the biodegradable nature of these materials means we would need an isotope test to even detect a strange concentration of once biological materials, if we bothered to look for it at all. Would an archaeologist striking upon a high evidence of chitin be more likely to name it a manufacturing facility or the refuse pit of ancient crab fishermen? No matter what the answer is, the fact that we can't rule out the possibility that there are an ancient civilization built nothing like us, using materials we wouldn't consider. Don't you know that some architects and artists have spent the last few decades growing buildings out of living trees? Since trees have the remarkable ability to withstand storms and live, in some cases for thousands of years, trees make an excellent building material for those patient enough to try it. Once abandoned, botanical structures would grow and twist and burn and decay, leaving no trace of the scale of the people who lived there. But trees can also be preserved in dry or oxygen-free environments. In 2004, Hurricane Ivan exposed a 60,000-year-old forest off the coast of Alabama, 20 meters under the ocean. Covered in sediment and unable to decompose, the trunks were nearly pristine. If an ancient race used organic architecture and we found it in a similar way, would we see the civilization for the trees? And if so, what of their technology? Remember that our own has advanced nearly beyond human imagination. Some strange technologies, like quantum computing, might leave no trace at all. DNA can now be used to code and store vast amounts of data preserved in silicon spheres the size of a grain of sand. Even if we discovered the sand, it would be a stretch to look inside for DNA, much less have the technology to read that DNA, much less recognize it as a code rather than a biological blueprint, much less read it without a Rosetta Stone. That's also why the artifacts found to date had very little importance. Archaeologists have a tendency to give objects religious or ceremonial significance. The very relics they imbue with religious importance are immediately sold in large quantities as knockoffs to tourists visiting those same historic monuments. Perhaps that's all the statues ever were. Souvenirs for wandering tradesmen, advertisements for plays performed for kings, dolls for children, action figures, knickknacks, and kitsch. What if the 40,000-year-old Lohenmensch figurine advertised the latest horror film or the Venus of Hohlefels, a hunter's amateur whittle? In our increasingly secular societies where commerce outpaces communion, where imaginary plastic characters come free in children's meals, nearly every object we recognize has no profane or magical quality beyond our momentary delight. So, could we have developed sooner? Well, let's face it. Throughout human history, there have been many instances of advanced technologies that have been lost to time. From the ancient Egyptians and their pyramids to the Mayans and their sophisticated calendar systems, it seems that our ancestors were capable of incredible feats of engineering and innovation. But as civilizations rise and fall, so too do their technologies, leaving behind only fragments and hints of what once was. One of the most intriguing examples of lost technology is the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek analog computer that was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses for calendrical and astrological purposes. The device was discovered in 1901 in the Antikythera shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, and was initially thought to be a simple navigational instrument. However, upon further examination, it was found to be an incredibly complex mechanism made up of at least 30 bronze gears and inscriptions that were used to calculate the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. The exact purpose and workings of the Antikythera mechanism is still being studied and debated by scientists and historians, but its level of technological sophistication is undeniable. It is believed to have been created around 100 BCE and is believed to be the oldest known geared mechanism, predating any other known geared devices by over 1,000 years. Another example of lost technology is the Baghdad battery, which is a clay jar dating back to around 250 BCE that contained a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic solution, such as vinegar or wine, the jar generated electricity, making it an early form of a battery. The Baghdad battery is a curious and unusual object, and its purpose and usage is still being debated among archaeologists. The ancient Egyptians not only built the pyramids, but also created complex systems of irrigation that allowed them to farm in the desert. Their technology of creating water channels and canals that can still be seen today in many parts of Egypt. The Incas, who lived in South America, had an incredible road system that spanned the entire length of their empire. These roads were built with precision and were able to withstand heavy rainfall and landslides. They were also able to build suspension bridges out of grass, which have since been replaced by more modern materials, but are still an impressive feat of engineering. The Indus Valley Civilization, which existed around 2500 BCE in present-day Pakistan and northwest India, had advanced systems for sanitation and water management. They built drainage systems and underground sewers to control water and prevent flooding, which was an engineering marvel for that era. In addition to these examples of lost technology, there are also technologies that have been rediscovered and are still used today. For example, the technique of making Damascus steel, which was developed by the ancient Syrians, was lost for centuries, but was rediscovered in the 19th century and is now used in creating high-quality knives and swords. Similarly, the Greek and Roman method of creating concrete was lost after the fall of the Roman Empire, but was rediscovered in the 18th century and is now used in the construction industry. You see, the advancements and capabilities of our ancestors may have been greater than we ever imagined. The lost technologies of the past remind us that we still have much to learn from the wisdom and knowledge of those who came before us. These ancient technologies also reveal how much humanity can achieve with the resources and knowledge available to them, and inspire us to continue to push the boundaries of what is possible with our own technology today. The technologies that have been rediscovered also demonstrate how we can build on the knowledge of the past and apply it in new ways. With ongoing research and excavations, we may yet uncover even more lost technologies and gain a greater understanding of our past and our potential. In addition, remember that besides the lost technology of the ancients, history is littered with inventions and inventors who did not succeed in mass production. For instance, the Baghdad battery remains a mystery. Aylmer of Malmesbury flew a glider over his monastery in the 11th century, 800 years before the Wright brothers. Worse, the secrets of wireless technology died with Tesla 100 years before the invention of the cell phone. For those who don't know, Nikola Tesla had numerous unusual obsessions. One of his beliefs was that the Great Pyramids of Egypt were giant transmitters of energy, a a thought that coincided with his investigation into how to send energy wirelessly. In 1905, Tesla filed a patent in the US titled "The Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through the Natural Medium," outlining designs for a series of generators around the world which would tap the ionosphere for energy collections. He saw planet Earth itself, with its two poles, as a giant electrical generator of limitless energy. His triangle-shaped design became known as Tesla's electromagnetic pyramid. What's notable, according to Tesla, it wasn't just the shape of the Egyptian pyramids, but their location that created their power. He built a tower facility known as the Tesla Experimental Station in Colorado Springs and Wardenclyffe Tower, or Tesla Tower, on the East Coast, that sought to take advantage of the Earth's energy field. The locations were chosen according to the laws of where the pyramids of Giza were built, related to the relationship between the elliptical orbit of the planet and the equator. The design was intended for wireless transmission of energy. So, were the Great Pyramids essentially ancient Tesla towers? We just don't know. But we know that the human imagination is that it has no limits or ending. Sadly, the history of science shows us that our minds have always exceeded our wallets. Inventing is one thing, adopting it is another. Inventors need marketing and funding for mass distribution, meaning many great ideas languish in the historical rubbish bin. On the flip side, some of the technology we rely on today is millennia old. We forget that the coal-burning, steam-powered electricity generating power plants that drive our economies are based on a 2,000-year-old invention, the Iolipile, which we have improved upon but rarely replaced. We're loath to admit we made our own mistakes on the technological path. If the Romans hadn't adopted Christianity, would we have landed on the moon in 400 CE? During the Renaissance, scholars taught themselves Greek, Latin, and Arabic in order to translate the original texts of philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, lost during the Dark Ages. 4 centuries later, men stood on the moon. Would we have achieved it even sooner, absent time to retool? In other words, as advanced as we are we millennia behind? Regardless, we know that the discovery of a technologically advanced precursor could be what we need. We see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution as we overconsume, warm the planet, feed ourselves grossly obese, and ignore the extinction of our fellow terrestrial travelers. If we found evidence that someone like us, no, someone better than us, had their run and disappeared, that warning might be enough to wake us from our fever dream of progress. In Kazakhstan, at the Semipalatinsk test range, abandoned concrete observation towers rise like shark fins on the lonely steppe. They face what was once a nuclear test site. What will humans think of this 10,000 years from now? They will firstly recognize that the concrete is of inferior construction to that of Rome 2 millennia earlier, leading them to assume the civilization that built them lacked knowledge transfer with Roman society. They might register the high residual radiation. They might pinpoint it to the center where temperatures equal to the surface of the sun melted sand into glass. There they would stop, and, assuming our ignorance, say that the towers were part of a ritual observance of perhaps a meteorite collision. Ancient peoples worshipping an extraordinary event they could barely understand. A 20th century Stonehenge made less impressive due to the erection of aggregate stone rather than monolithic slabs. Ascribe those standing relics to a nuclear race? Laughable? We call it the Stone Age because stones are all that's left. Will the atomic age be reduced to the age of concrete? Some of man's most ingenious manipulation of matter reduced to one enduring element by unequal, unimaginative amateur grave robbers. What if we are the primitive ones, unable to make heads or tails of our ancestors' magnificent technology, picking through the foundations of space elevators, unable to comprehend the ancestors who used them to escape their own hubris? Consider the screw discovered in a 300-million-year-old rock in Russia in the 90s. Scientists describe it as a natural formation, a hoax, or the fossil of a crinoid. That denial drives the opposite end of the spectrum to posit wild theories of alien visitations and advanced technology. Such out-of-place objects are telling not in themselves, but in the reaction they produce in us. Both responses are narcissistic. Both assume that humans at this moment occupy the peak of technological development, that no ancient race could invent a screw, that only an alien race might. We engage in either narrative to keep our contemporary selves at the top of the pyramid. A screw is, after all, an inclined plane, one of the simplest mechanical inventions, found in nature and manufactured by humans. If we can't agree on a screw lodged in a rock, how would we ever agree on anything more advanced? When ancient Hindu texts describe the Vimana, flying machines or aerial chariots, archaeologists and aeronautical engineers scoff. But now, we fly in ever larger aircraft ourselves, even built cities in space. We've moved beyond mechanical and combustion mechanisms towards seemingly miraculous flight with no moving parts. We've done it. Why couldn't they? After all, with all the richness and diversity of our documented history, we still know only a tiny part of how little we know about our past and how many mysteries remain offstage. Our history, recorded in books and monuments, is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of history is hidden from us, lost in the mists of time. Thus, the implications of finding an advanced civilization would be profound, reshaping our understanding of human history, our technological potential, and our understanding of social development. It would also pose significant questions about the rise and fall of advanced societies and what might lead to their disappearance. Such a discovery could fundamentally change our perception of our ancestors and our place in the world. Last but not least, let's shift the attention to the Silurian hypothesis, a fascinating thought experiment that appeared in a study published in 2018 in the International Journal of Astrobiology. The possibility of life elsewhere in the universe and its parallels with the Anthropocene, the current geological epoch, during which humans have impacted Earth to the point of no return, has long puzzled Adam Frank, Ph.D., a professor of astrophysics at the University of Rochester, New York, and one of the two authors of the study.
Is it common for any civilization that reaches our level of energy use to trigger their own version of climate change? I was wondering, if there are alien civilizations, would they also trigger climate change?
With this whirlwind of thoughts in mind, Frank visited the NASA Goddard Institute of Space Sciences, or GISS for short, an elite climate science facility at the University of Columbia, New York. He wanted to share his thoughts with climate researchers, and surely expected lots of raised eyebrows and skeptical stares in the process.
I went into the meeting with Gavin A. Schmidt, a climatologist and the director of NASA GISS with a PhD in applied mathematics, and started talking about aliens. And then Gavin stopped me and said, "Wait a second, how do you know we're the only time there's been a civilization on our own planet?"
The question was an aha moment for Frank, mostly because it allowed him to consider revisiting facts he had taken for granted. Homo sapiens, as you know, first appeared on Earth about 300,000 years ago. In the unlikely case that such an old industrial civilization had existed, it would predate the species to which we all belong. Schmidt called the idea the Silurian hypothesis, paying homage to the sophisticated reptilian humanoids awoken by nuclear testing after 400 million years of hibernation in a 1970s episode of the British science fiction television series Doctor Who. The study authors decided to laser in on the time period from 4 million years ago to 400 million years ago. But going back hundreds of millions of years to find traces of a potential pre-Homo sapiens civilization is not a piece of cake. After a few million years, Earth is pretty much resurfaced. You're not going to have any statues, buildings, or anything left. Fossil records will be virtually non-existent as everything will have crumbled to dust. The only evidence would come in the form of chemical imprints. You'd have to look at each layer of rock and then try and detect trends. Look for changes in things like the carbon or oxygen isotopes, which are tracers of things like carbon dioxide. An industrial civilization would dump lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, just like we do. Plastic or nanoparticles would also be good indicators of an industrial civilization that occurred in time immemorial. Schmidt and Frank were intrigued by the period of geological history known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, because something peculiar happened on our planet during it 56 million years ago. Earth's average temperature soared to 15 degrees Fahrenheit above what we have today, and the world became a temperate and iceless place. They investigated the carbon and oxygen isotope ratios from the P-TEM and indeed saw spikes, but they also saw declines, and all of these over a few 100,000 years, which is nowhere near the speed at which carbon is currently suffocating the atmosphere. Frank says the PTM's chemical differences pointed to a long-term climate change. They also reviewed other abrupt events throughout time that are visible in the geologic record, including ocean anoxic events, when an ocean becomes depleted of oxygen, and extinction events. Unsurprisingly, and perhaps slightly disappointingly, they were not indicative of an industrial civilization either. As Stephen Holler, Ph.D., an associate professor of physics at Fordham University in New York City, the hypothesis that Earth may have harbored long-extinct industrial civilizations and that existence may be recorded in the geologic record associated with climate change signatures is fascinating. However, even the authors are not sold on the likelihood of it being true. A great rule of thumb exists in science, and it goes by the name Occam's razor. In the 14th century, English Franciscan philosopher and theologian William of Ockham proposed that the likeliest solution to a problem is the simplest one. In the words of Holler, that is very likely the case here. We can largely explain the geologic record in terms of natural phenomena, so there is no need to invoke lost civilizations. However, if an earlier industrial civilization did exist, and its extinction was the result of catastrophic climate change due to industrial activities, then we should heed the warnings because, as a civilization, we stand at the precipice. It will be a hard landing when we go over the edge, and we very well might not survive, says Holler. There is an oxymoron to the Silurian hypothesis. The more sustainable a society is in the way it generates energy and manufactures resources, arguably, the more advanced a society is, the smaller the footprint it will leave on the planet. Yet, this smaller footprint would translate to few markers on the geologic record for that period. For example, the more plastic or persistent synthetic molecules we produce, the higher the chances future civilizations will find traces of us. Our society produces 300 million tons of plastic each year worldwide, almost the equivalent of the weight of the entire human population. Even if we wipe ourselves off the face of Earth with a nuclear catastrophe, long-lived radioactive particles will endure in the soil eons later, signaling we had existed.
With the Silurian hypothesis, we articulated the kinds of signals that our civilization would leave if we disappear, and somebody looks for our civilization 10 or 20 millions of years from now.
But most of all, the experiment demonstrated certain shortcomings in our current scientific apparatus.
In case an earlier species' industrial activity was particularly short-lived, we would not be able to detect it in ancient sediments with the tools and methods we have now. If you want to look for evidence of a previous civilization, you'd have to do studies that nobody's done and develop novel methods, For example, you'd have to figure out ways to look at the rock record on a much finer timescale.
Remember, we are talking about millions of years of evolution of complex life and an unsparing Earth that grinds down everything in its wake. And though both Frank and Schmidt don't really believe an industrial civilization existed before our own, the main takeaway of the Silurian hypothesis, Frank says, is that if you're not explicitly looking for something, you might not even see it. That's all the information that we have for you today. Now, don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you never miss out on future episodes. And be sure to also tell us what you think about today's content. Everyone's support motivates us to continue delivering quality content and to always improve. As always, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.